We welcome you to the Priscilla R. Tyson Cultural Arts Center for our conversations and coffee today on this 8th day of August 2024. I'm Ellen O'Shaughnessy, coordinator of the program. We celebrate our main gallery artist today, Paul Rienzo, who shares his amazing art, Untold Myths, primitive paintings, and sculpture. Paul is a Cincinnati artist who drove to us from Cincinnati this morning. Thank you, Paul. And he believes that art must tell a story. So we are surrounded by stories. Paul is a student of Gestalt psychotherapy, psychology, anthropology, and such illustrators as Norman Rockwell and Joseph Leyendecker. Paul uses rich color, powerful composition, and remarkable figurative realism to draw us into the psychic narrative of his paintings. His paintings are subtle, social statements regarding the loss of innocence in American life. Paul says that my compositions have a photographic quality, and I want the viewer to imagine there is more happening outside the frame in the same way a photograph represents only a fraction of an event. Paul is a self-taught artist. He holds a degree in chemical engineering from Worcester Polytech Institute in Massachusetts. He believes that the success of any painting primarily lies in its ability to stimulate, to provoke an interpretation or reaction. Realism has an incredible potential for provoking such viewer reaction, and the camera is the ideal tool for recording it. Paul engages the viewer by painting figures in action. Feel all that action here? Wow, huh? Paul shares that there are numerous advantages to using photographs as a springboard for his works. Not only do photos freeze moments in time, stopping motion and light, but they also allow him to paint subjects that he couldn't do otherwise. As you say, you really can't set up an easel in the middle of a busy crowd. He says, although I want my work to give the illusion of great accuracy, the painting is always quite different from the photograph. Paul simplifies to work by removing details like clothing patterns or blemishes to create just a few textures. He might use bolder colors for emphasis. Paul, we're eager to hear more about your amazingly creative, innovative approach of the symbiotic union of photography and painting. Your work has appeared in numerous publications, including an article in American Artist Watercolor magazine. You have shown around the United States, including an exhibition in New York City's Soho District, which stands for South of Houston Street. Your work is found in numerous collections, including the Museo de Arte Contemporáneo Plaza in La Paz, Bolivia. You are an experienced juror and author. Your paintings bring such beauty and creativity to us here in our main gallery. So we thank you for being with us today. And driving from Cincinnati, no less.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks all for coming. Managing to get through all the construction in downtown Columbus. Yeah, right. So, as she said, I'm from Cincinnati, and I've been painting about, well, I really was painting in college, so you can see that's a long time ago. Oops. there. I've won a lot of different awards locally, some internationally. I don't do watercolor, but I was in Watercolor magazine because acrylic is water media, so they put it in. I teach a class at Middletown Arts Center, and I spent 30 years at P&G, where I worked in like new product development. I was a principal scientist, and I wrote 3 business books, after I retired. And I painted extensively till about 1995, and then I took a break till COVID was over. COVID started, and then I started up again. And some of the work I started doing, started to change because I was doing primarily like figurative crowd work, at crowd scenes. And now when they go out to photograph crowds, everybody's got a cell phone in their hand, so not all that interesting like it once was. So I had to find something else to paint. And as my work kind of evolved, I found this idea of mythos morte, or Tom renamed it Untold Myths, what I really like, which is nature morte was the original term for still lifes, dead nature. And for me, the mythology became important, and that's what I started working with, because mythology is just so pervasive in our culture today. And as I talk, you'll see how you'll say, "Oh, yeah, it is, isn't it?" So I want to talk 2 topics today. The first one will be about big ideas for bodies of work, and then I'll get into some technical, like process stuff. Like, how many here are work in acrylics? So we have a few. So I might do something different then, depending on where the interest is and how long the first topic takes, because I have a backup deck just in case. So now for me, my philosophy as I'm painting, or what I choose to paint, is you got to find a subject matter that interests you. The last thing you want to do is be, painting fields of daisies if you don't like painting fields of daisies. You need to have a big idea for your body of work, which I will talk about. And a big idea is a simple, central organizing thought behind the work that helps you inspires you, but also helps you make choices. So there might be something that say, oh, that would be cool to paint, but doesn't really fit with the big idea behind the body of work I'm trying to create, so maybe I shouldn't do that. Or it's like, gee, what do I paint next? Oh, I've got all this stuff I can draw from. And it should establish a unique territory for the work versus what everybody else is doing. And I also believe that each piece needs to have something to say. So I don't want the work to be merely decorative, although you want to have stuff that looks nice, that's going to attract people. But at the same time, everything should be, I like what someone said at the opening around, oh, they're like conversation starters, which is kind of cool. Even that conversations with yourself, they're conversation starters. And I also believe that when the big idea is spent, when you have nothing new to say about it, you go find another big idea to work with. I also believe in creating by any means necessary. So I am not a purist. I am not gonna, I paint acrylics, but I will use gouache, I will use markers, I will use acrylic spray paint, whatever it takes to get the look I want is all I go after. And also, I do not draw, and I will explain that later. I used to draw a lot, but I don't anymore. And I'm experimenting all the time. And in fact, like when one of the reasons why I like teaching my class is because my students teach me stuff. And so that's like, I learn some different things in each class that I do that I haven't been thinking about. Or they'll make a suggestion about a painting I could do, and I'll say, oh, that's kind of cool, and I'll do that. And I also like to teach something new to myself with each piece. I don't like repeating myself. Occasionally I will, but I want to be there's something, teach myself intellectually, teach myself, from technically, or both. I usually, every piece I do, there's usually something in there that I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do that, but I will find a way.
Paul, could you show us an example of what you've said with the work, let's say, behind you? One of the ones, actually probably a better one, I'm trying to think what would be a good one around, this was interesting. I learned a lot from this work because I originally had in my mind that I was going to, I want really bold colors, as bold as possible. And I was using neon paint and things like that. And it was just so much, believe it or not, I toned it down. It doesn't look like it, but believe me, I actually toned it down. I didn't know how I was going to paint. I didn't know how the cherries would come out. Those came out spectacular. I had to get rid of some of the reflections. The way I accomplished this was I used, this is holographic vinyl, and I just laid it out in the back and in the bright sunshine, and that's kind of the effect I found. So I'm always looking for different kinds of fabrics, different kinds of objects, different kinds of textures that, again, don't necessarily know how I'm going to paint them, but they're interesting to try. I mentioned where did this big idea come from? When I was at Procter & Gamble, everyone was telling, we need a big idea, whenever there was a new product coming out. And everyone said they knew what a big idea was or what it could do, but they couldn't really define what it was. And so I found in architecture, when an architect is building an important building, they're usually starting with a big idea to figure out how they're going to build this, what it's going to look like, what's important, what's not important. And so for me, that's became very important for me at P&G, but also I brought it back to my artwork. This is, I was playing around with this like 2012, 2015, and so eventually that became kind of the basis for some of the thinking behind this body of work. And so you can find big ideas in art throughout history. So Impressionism, one of the things that drove that was the artist's spontaneous impression of light and atmosphere. So it was based on scientific thought and was very different from what had come before. That's why it looked so different. As well as the paint technology changed. They were able to get much brighter colors about that time. So things really became very different for them. Cubism became, a two-dimensional painting a traditional painting doesn't capture all the sides of something. It's just one view. So how could I create represent multiple sides of something? And that's where Cubism started to come in. And it abandoned realism, but their thought was this is how they really are versus how we see them. Abstraction was a breakthrough in thought where it was, we're not painting a representation of something. In abstraction, the art is the object, and by itself, it stands alone. And so that was a breakthrough thought. And different artists have, known artists have big ideas that they work from. Kehinde Wiley, he has reinterpreted classic paintings in the point of view of African Americans. And you can see that picture over the center picture on the right is an example of something that he does. Marc Chagall was known for these dreamlike compositions that were extremely personal to him, kind of went back to his childhood, and almost were like dreamlike, and they based in folklore and culture. So these, like Marc Chagall, that was what he did his entire lifetime, was he painted that. These other movements, the artist's work looks similar sometimes because that's just
They were all working off the same idea. For me, a big idea, you can have multiple bodies of work during your career, and think about, in my own case, I was doing figurative crowd scenes. Now I'm doing more of these mythologically based still lifes. So we talked about this, so I can skip that. Well, let me maybe double click on it. So it should unify the body of work and set it aside, set it apart from other people's work. It should be able to be expressed very simply, and should spark curiosity. So my original idea for the Untoldness was Mythos Morte, but those two, either one, you can see it's like, oh, what's that going to be about? And often what it should also do is, although the big idea should run through the whole body of work, and doesn't need to be expressed, should be almost expressed, what do they call it, subconsciously or subliminally, not necessarily in your face. I learned that from when I worked at P&G. I worked on herbal essences. And like we had this concept for a product line called addiction. And if you showed it in focus groups, and you talked about it being shampoos that were addictive, people are like, I don't want to be addictive, why do I want that? But then if you describe it in addictive terms, like, oh, the luxurious lather will leave you like wanting to touch your hair, you won't keep your hands off of it, and it'll just leave you wanting for more. And people are like, I want that. So you don't want to be necessarily in their face with it, but you do want it just below the surface.
Can you show us an example, let's say over here, as we gaze at this
sure,
beauty?
Let's see. So, like, it's interesting, and we'll talk about some of this other stuff too, because it's based on a theme, and you might have, in what goes on in my mind might be different than how your mind puts it together. But one of the ones that I like, that would be, if you think about it too much, it could be upsetting, is the, I'll walk over to there.
Yes, why don't you show us.
This is called martyrdom, and it's it's very whimsical, but at the same time, and that kind of diffuses it. You've got a bunny being crucified, and for me, as I thought about martyrdom and how this could come to play, there's this new things spark from martyrs. You know, it's almost like something new comes up in the culture. And for me, that's what the carrots were. You almost have like martyrs are worshipped. And this is a Royal Crown Derby paperweight called Starry Starry Night in honor of Van Gogh. And that was just something I really liked. I don't know if I painted as well as I could, but that is also like this, the martyr goes on to heaven sort of thing. Now, the first thing you see when you see this is, oh, look at the bunny rabbits. And that carrot stuff looks funny. So that kind of draws you in, and your interpretation could be different, and that's perfectly valid. Actually, one of the things that I did want to touch on, is everyone familiar with the controversy around the Olympics opening ceremony? And this kind of goes back to Gestalt psychology, where your mind tries to make sense of stuff. So people that were using their own experiences to make sense of what was happening in that scene, and for them it was like, oh, that's the Last Supper. They're being so disrespectful. But the artist, well, I guess you'd call him an artist, the producer, the director, he was thinking of this French painting about the Greeks. But your mind will put what it can together out of what it sees and just kind of discard the rest. And so there was a huge controversy. The other thing you find too is that it's really hard to convince somebody that's decided what something says that that's not what it says. No, that's what it is. Because I did a show once, and our critic came walking around work and said, "Oh, I really think this is interesting because you've got like the evolution of man, and somehow the Chinese came out on top." And I said, "Well, no, actually, they're just standing in line for a hot dog." And and he said, "Well, sometimes the critic knows more than the artist." Okay. I had another one where I did I dropped the painting off. It was in Chillicothe. I think it was Chillicothe. And when I went to go pick up the painting, the art director said, "Oh, the students found that so poignant." They did. Yeah, because that's the ancient. No, I don't have it here. I don't have it. That's very poignant. That you got the guy there that's the angel of death, and he's getting CPR on the table. And actually, it was a Venice Beach scene where someone was getting a massage, and it happened that the fat guy had a T-shirt that said, "I want your body." So it was. So this, your mind, and I really like those sort of things. Well, I will talk about one. Where is it? I think it's in there. Yeah, it's up there. We're not going to go over there. But it was another one I put up for a show. It came back, and everyone was asking, "What's this one actually about?" Because we were all talking about it last night, and someone thought it was about pro-life versus pro-choice, and well, no, it's actually a Cupid doll and a couple of toys. But there is something to trying to evoke meaning in what you choose. And some is I do pick stuff that has a lot of symbolic meaning packed into it, and with a lot of associations, and that's going to make your mind go, trying to say something. What is it that it's actually saying to me? So.
How often does the title come first?
Not always, but most of the time. Most of the time. And sometimes, so I have in mind what I want to do, but then over time, I might say, oh, like for instance, this one here.
Go over to that one. Yeah.
Oops. Originally, I was looking for a title, and I was summoning it first, and then played around. But then, as I thought about it, I ended up changing it. So man created God, and then I thought that was a little bit too controversial, so I said, so man created gods. So that one changed. Trying to think what other ones.
Tell us how that came about from an artistic point of view. How did you do that?
This one?
Yes.
I'll talk about technique. All of the objects you see here, I have owned at one time.
Oh.
And so I saw these on Etsy, and I picked them up. And then these are horse apples. Have you seen those? Anyone know what a horse apple is? Okay, they're like this fruit that is inedible. In fact, they think the dinosaurs ate them, but the dinosaurs aren't around anymore, so they just lay on the ground and rot. This was I saw this at a home goods store. That was pretty cool. I liked how they lit. And these swans I found like at an antique mall. So I pick up stuff all over the place. I always got my eye on things. And so that's how it kind of got put together.
And the background,
This I will sometimes, for skies, sometimes I'll use pictures that I have taken. Sometimes I'll go looking online to find pictures to play with, and I'll give an example later. And then this is just a fabric that I found. So yeah. But yeah, I'm always trying to, one thing I did learn from this exhibit is people really like it when I do skies instead of like backdrops. So I'm probably gonna be doing more skies. So anyway, that's big idea. I mentioned the crowd scenes, and this just gives you an idea of like just the range that you could do this. This was my short series that I thought was going to be a long series, but in 2019 we went to the Macy's Day Parade. This is just before COVID, and it happened that the wind was blowing, so they had all the balloons really low to the ground. So I took lots of photographs. I did about I think it was 5 total paintings from that day. And I was often I will take some piece of this from this photo and a piece from this photo, and so Photoshop is my sketchbook, and I'll talk about that. And then these are the untold myths. And that was another kind of involved for me. Originally, I thought it was going to be culture clash, and I didn't find that as rich as moving towards this other area around untold myths. So, finding your own big idea. How many of you are working artists? I don't mean necessarily paid artists. I just mean working. So, finding your own big idea, you're looking for something that's going to leverage your strengths. If you're not good at painting figures, your big idea shouldn't include figures. It should be something that kind of leverages your strengths. It has to be a subject that interests you. Otherwise, you're just not going to you're not going to want to go to the easel every day. It needs to be a large creative space. I've got this one idea, another big idea, and so this is actually part of it's kind of the outer perimeter of the untold myths, but it's also this idea of in a bucket, because a bucket's this really interesting metaphor because it's about categorizing, it's about throwing stuff away. Lots of rich stuff with it. And so I have these other ideas that I'm thinking of, like trying to think of what could I put in a bucket. I put Barbies in a bucket. Didn't show that here because it didn't really feel like it was untold myths, versus this is good guys and bad, which you find in all mythology. But I had Barbies in the bucket. I took some of the sculptures that, the marble-like sculptures that are in some of these works, and I put them in a bucket, and it's a bucket of antiquities. I got a few others, but it's not like, I have like 200 ideas that I haven't done with the untold myths. I'm having trouble to come up with 6 or 7 good ones for the in a bucket. I'm probably going to do them, but it's not going to be like a extended series. And also think about, what do you like to see but you haven't seen? It's like, gee, I wish I would hang that in my house, but no one makes it. So maybe that would be an area for you to make it yourself. So this is, talking about mythology, this is some of the narratives today. Marvel Studio, actually, that's why I wore this shirt. It's Star Wars is the hero's journey, as is Tommy Boy. Anyone ever seen that Chris Farley movie with Tommy Boy? As is Finding Nemo, as is Lord of the Rings. Joseph Campbell wrote this book years ago called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. He did a PBS series on like these themes. So I guess you could say he's one of my big inspirations for this work, because I'm looking for themes that I find repeated in different cultures. You got Marvel Studios, Game of Thrones, dragons all over the place. That's all mythology.
Are there examples here that demonstrate those themes?
So some are like straight up themes. So like the one back there is called Twins. And twins you see particularly in African culture, but in cultures around the globe, around these stories that come about with twins. So in this case, I actually made it kind of industrial versus agrarian. And she's holding twins as have been in bronze reproduction. And so that would be an example of something happens that you see all over the place. The bubble wrap painting is called Facing Giants. Like David and Goliath is the most common Christian one. But you see it all over the place, where it's the little guy standing up to the big invincible guy and defeating him. The one right next to it is called Deluge. And so the flood story is across cultures. You see it from Noah, but all cultures seem to have that in common. The one next to that is theft. So this is theft, and theft, stealing fire, Prometheus, the Jack and the Beanstalk, stealing something. And so that's why I've got here kind of these fire elements, red peppers. They're not hot, but they're red. I got the figurine of a boy stealing a goose, running away. The father, the giant, the god, his back is turned. There's also kind of this concern from the crowd, oh boy, he's done something bad. So that's all kind of elements that you see in these theft stories. And then both of these are really about creation. In the beginning, there's kind of almost a good and evil thing going here. I just thought this is a really cool piece of pottery that looked like creation. And then another version of that is here, where I had a couple of bookends and some interesting sequin fabric. Would not recommend painting sequins again, but I did it. So that would be just a few examples of themes that you just get repeated and repeated. And I think because that people just relate to them. There's a reason why the Avengers movies were so huge, because it's going back to tapping into mythology. In fact, most of Disney's stuff, if you look at it, it's all about mythology. But it's also...
how is it, I know you've made reference to it, how do you bring about the brilliance of the color that you have?
I tend to use a lot of cadmiums and cobalts. I tend to use I guess the heavy metals sort of colors. And that's really, I think, what kind of brings that out. And I also kind of layer it up. Acrylic itself is just a much brighter color to work with anyway than oils.
Have you tried the new Liquid Touch line of cadmium-free cadmium colors?
Yes. I've been using one of the cadmium-free yellows. I'm tending to use, I really like the cadmium red light, but I also using the pyroli. I think that's how you say it, both the orange and the red. Those are awesome because they also are very color fast, and they're not as transparent as some of the other ones. So yeah, I play around with it, but I'm still kind of traditional with that. But I have probably, I counted them. I have like 150 tubes of paint of different colors. If you think about it, you might as well have them on hand. If you're going to use it, you're going to use them at some point, and just gives you more variety to work with.
Anyone else have any comment here? I can see from the expression on their faces they're in awe.
That's the coffee. And Avatar is kind of like, also, I mean, you think about the storyline there. The Bible has a lot of mythology pieces to it, particularly the Old Testament stuff. And unfortunately, like, there's all the conspiracy theories we see in our politics. I think is indicative of kind of this craving for mythology that we have. One of the things that, so Joseph Campbell in the 80s said that science has spent the last couple hundred years discarding mythology. But then he said, but it seems like that people are still have a hunger for it. And I think the farther away we've gotten from it, I think that the craving for mythology has grown even more. Especially when you think about science is almost becoming mythology, because when the apple fell from the tree, as the story goes, that's mythology, but after the apple fell from the tree and hit Newton in the head, that's something we all can experience. We have to rely on these obscure observations about black holes and stuff to believe those, and atomic and stuff. We can't see that. So in a way, it's becoming just as disconnected from reality as myths had been. So that advantage that science had in terms of, like, well, we can prove it, isn't there as much anymore because you can't see it, feel it, touch it. And I think because of that, I think we're wired for mythology. We like these stories. We crave these stories to explain things. And so I think that's why it's come back. It's in the video games we have. It's in Harry Potter. It's in TV shows. It's in kids shows like Moana. I mean, Maui is actually a Polynesian. There's all kinds of stories about Maui he was basically a Hercules kind of figure in Polynesia. So this is a sample of some of the books that I've read. This is actually a pretty good book. So I actually saved that one. So after I read it, because I might refer to it again. But I mentioned a lot of these different folks, different things that I try to read. I don't read it like I'm studying it. I'm skimming it for ideas, and then I jot the ideas down. It's not so much trying to become an expert on all these different types of mythologies, just looking for ideas.
Again, can you show us examples
Of stuff that I've
of your work, in your work for?
Let's see.
You've got Romulus and Remus.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And there's the Raised by Wolves. It's a very specific story about how Rome was founded, and the twins were suckled by a wolf. But you do see that same sort of thing where in other cultures where the children are abandoned and have to be nursed by an animal and then they eventually become special or whatever. But yeah, that would be an example. Really, almost all of these, I can point back to some mythological story that I've seen. Let's see. So I do have part of a body of work is you got to make rules for yourself. And I'm calling them guidelines because I don't always follow the rules. But so I want to do inanimate objects. Since it's a still life, I want to have flowers in still life, flowers or fruit in every painting. It needs to be multicultural. So each piece will have something from like Japan, and from Brazil, and from the U.S. or Germany or whatever, all in the same painting. Because to me, I want to get across the global nature of this. I mentioned it's got to be a recurring myth in folklore. I don't want to use the same object twice, although sometimes I have. For example, in Spirit, the glass figurine is the same one I used in Whispers. I don't know if y'all can see it. So it was just something interesting to me. And plus it's glass, so it always looks different. So.
And tell us about the process. You set up the scene.
Yep.
and you photograph it, and then you move to your paints.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on kind of the process next.
Yes.
And I'll just walk you through what I do. And let me just finish up. So I want to be, myths can be very gory, especially like if you go to Japan, it's all about ghosts and death. And if you go to India, it's all about ripping hearts out and stuff. So that's not going to really play real well with today's tastes. What is interesting, though, is it does play really well in movies, but not necessarily in two-dimensional work. So if you go back to traditionally, even like when you look at still lifes in the 1500s, 1600s, lots of death and skulls and all that stuff. That whole thing has kind of disappeared for the most, not completely, but kind of disappeared in terms of people want to see, to more what it is today, which is more uplifting. I want to be evocative versus provocative. So I don't want to shock you necessarily. I want to invite you in. I'm looking for unexpected compositions. Photorealism is kind of my jam. Lots of textures. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the 22-2 principle, which actually comes from P&G design, which is what the designers are designing packaging. They think about the shelf and how does it look from 20 feet, how does it look for 2 feet, and how does it look in your hand. So, and I worked in a lot of different products, but basically you'll have like 30 facings of shampoo. How does that look from 20 feet away? When they get close, how does that look? And when they hold it in their hand, does it still hold their attention? So that's what I'm looking for in all these paintings is I want you to see it from across the room and draw you in. I want you to then as you walk toward it, go see something interesting. And then when you do this to look and see, I want you to see something more. So that has that level of engagement. I think I pretty much covered that. This is my running idea list, 1 page of it. This is actually 4 pages at this point. Some of the stuff I don't know if I'm ever going to figure out how to bring it to life, but this is just a list. It's not meant for reading, it's to give you an idea of what I do. So we've kind of had a lot of, any other questions? I'm going to talk about the process next. Any questions before I move on? Okay. So, got to have a well-stocked well. So, at the bottom of the well, you're trying to educate and immerse yourself. And then I collect and I do field trips. And you can do that with anything. When I was doing crowd scenes, every year I would go to Venice Beach with my camera and take photographs and spend the next year working from that. You want to analyze and look for insight, of what you see. That gives you some ideas that you write down. Then you need to take photos, and then you paint. So each piece, and I should also mention, so you saw the list of ideas I have there. I also have about 40 finished photos that I want to paint. And some of them will kind of fall off. Once in a while, there's some stuff I've got on I got 8x10 photos of things I want to paint. I've had them for a couple of years, but then sometimes something will come up that I take and say, oh, I got to paint that right now. That is so cool. And so I have that too. And then there's some things like I will take a photograph of it. It's not quite right. And then a couple months later, I'll rephotograph it with some things changed out. And then I might rephotograph it again. So theft was an interesting one because I actually photographed that like 4 different times. And all the elements that were pretty similar. I didn't have peppers in the first one, but I did have the coconut heads, and I did have the figurines and the pitcher, the water pitcher in all versions of it. But it just took a while to come up with something that I actually liked and wanted to paint. So like I said, the first step is the photo shoot. Actually, remember that grid because I'll come back to that. I'm going to show you in a second. Photoshop is my sketchbook. So here was the original photo I took for this piece. Again, this is on my drawing board or on my folder of things to do. Not all that exciting. You can see I will put like an illustration board behind it if I think I'm going to put a sky or something in the background. It makes it easier to remove if it's one plain thing. And then I looked around for various backgrounds. I kind of like this to go in the back. And so, but it was like 10 other things I was looking at too. And so this is one version of the finished photograph where you can see in Photoshop I've combined the things but also created just some optimization of the color so that it's got more detail. And then as I was putting together the deck, I went, well, these frogs, I don't know, they're a little small, and that's a little small. And maybe I'll do that. Oh, and I also decided maybe that's a distraction, so I took those out. But now that I've taken them out, I said, you know what? Although I don't, and plus it looks like a snow scene, so the leafy greens don't really fit so much with it anymore. But then that looks kind of dull. So when the fall comes, or with the leaves to fall off, I'll pick some branches and I'll photograph those and then I'll put those in. And in fact, one quick one to say. So this was an interesting painting, how this came to be. So it's called Three Bears, and it's really kind of on a Goldilocks sort of theme. And these are dandelions, obviously, now. So I actually was doing this during the painting I was working on while I was teaching a class. And when I brought it in, they thought it was chrysanthemums, not necessarily dandelions. And I went, oh, that's a problem. And I looked at it a little bit more, and I said, the bear, and this was literally very at the end, I added this in. The actual, like the fluff. Because it defined the dandelions, it gave the bear something to blow on, because he was just sitting there. And again, the class was kind of shocked. It's like, you mean you've been working on this for 8 weeks, and right at the end you decide you're going to plop that in the middle? That sounds like you got to be fearless. You got to be fearless with this stuff. What I did do though is I found a picture of a dandelion and dropped it in Photoshop before I actually tried to make it work. And so I think that made the painting much better. I also looked around at all of this work, and I counted about 25% of them, I reworked them when they were already framed. Sometimes more than once. So, and if you look closely, you can see which ones they are, because often they've got the paint on the rims of the frame. So the first step I do with the photograph is I get on Photoshop and expand the image so that it's going to be the exact same size as the canvas I'm going to work on. And I print it out. I basically chop it up, print it out in 8x10 sheets, tape it together, and so here's one I'm working on now. So this is what I will put together to get it ready for working. So what I do, oops, where did I put down my little clicker? Down here? Yes, okay. So that's kind of like the first step. Actually, before I do this, I paint on masonite. You can get this at Home Depot you get a 4x8 sheet at Home Depot for $15. chop it up, make three or four paintings, large paintings out of it. And I just gesso it a couple times, and I'm good to go. Sand it down, then I'm good to go. So it's what I like about it is it's very durable. I've had trouble with canvas getting poke-throughs, it's very flat. I like a nice, smooth surface to work with. I don't like the texture of canvas. When I was painting on canvas, I would use so much. I would take a palette knife and apply gesso, so it was really, really thick. But that also made it brittle. So this is just what I work with now. Then what I do is once I've got this gessoed, I will take this onto the board. I think most of you are old enough to know what carbon paper is. If you're not, you can still get it on Amazon. I have this stash of it that I got. I was working a summer job, and they were throwing away the old, they had that printout paper. They were throwing that away, and I went, oh, I can use that carbon paper. So I just took a box of it, and so I still have that box, and it's still good. So I take a dried out ballpoint pen and put the carbon paper underneath this, and then just literally just line draw all of it. So I don't do any drawing anymore. That's basically what I do. Before I would do a detailed drawing by hand, which would take as long as the painting would take. It just seemed like, and then I think this actually is even more precise than trying to draw by hand. So that's basically, I really only just started doing that when I came back to painting. Yeah, I'm 62, so you can't be wasting time drawing. If you're going to be productive. So once I've done the line drawing, I seal the carbon either with clear gesso, which is a fairly new product, or a matte medium. The clear gesso's got a little bit rougher surface, and you would have to sand it down before I actually paint on it. So I'm tending to use more matte medium but it's an option. Then I put on the base color, which you might call it a wash, a base color, but basically I try to just fill in some people you see they do like a wash with kind of almost like an iodine colored thing. I actually try to approximate the color when I do it, and just kind of put in the details. In fact, generally speaking, you kind of can, by the time I'm done, it's very close to being finished, or it's 80 for 20. So here's the painting that is still in progress, as you can see. And so I will use that as well as 8x10 photographs for reference. Kind of gives you two sides of the story or different perspective to paint from, and so I'll work with that. At this stage, you're only using a few colors. You're not trying to get it. You have a fairly limited palette. This is past that, by the way. Like the bottom is basically done.
Can you hold that up?
Yeah. So this is probably about a week's worth of work of putting paint down. It generally takes me a month to do a piece. Detail. I will, in this base coat, I'm basically using a soft, particularly in the background, a soft bristle brush, a little bit larger. Then I'll go a little bit more refined, and then I'll end up with something that's pretty thin over the whole painting. So. So let's see. Always trust the photo. You can change it later, but trust the photo and try to paint exactly what you see. I think one of the things that people struggle with is like when they see a white polar bear, they want to paint it white. And if they paint it white, it's not going to look right because there's hardly any white in that polar bear. just really in the highlights. It's more blues and grays. If you get lost in the details, put this back over it, do a little bit of up and down, and see where you missed, where you went wild, and fix it. I usually make 2 or 3 passes after the base coat, and I go from 3 or 4 colors to have like a dozen colors on my palette. Use a lot of grays and complementary hues to create more interest and stuff. Lights and darks bring it to life. Never use black. You can use, I like ultramarine blue and raw umber as an alternative to black. And then there's a lot of muted colors that are, you almost have to buy them online because you can't find them in art stores. They're by Liquitex. And so there's like a muted gray, and there's a muted turquoise and a muted pink, and they're all nice dark colors, and they can be used as alternatives to black. Also, Prussian blue is good, Hooker's green, things like that. I also love reflections. A lot of people talk about adding reflections at the end. I tend to add them as I'm going. Because it's acrylic, you often need to build up color, and you got to build up the reflections, like the highlights. Acrylic is not oil. It's often treated as oil, but it's really a very different process. I got to paint very fast because the paint dries so fast, and I like that. I can go right back over it. Oil, you have to wait, but oil painting is more like placing brushstrokes. I'm like.
Well, Paul, we just have a few more minutes.
I think that's about it. I got the varnish stage, and then.
And I thought, oh, yeah. Anyone have any reflections, any questions? Hasn't this been amazing to be part of your process, processus, which is what the Latin for going from town to town to town, and you've taken us on that wonderful journey. Anybody? I can see, yes.
Conversation. Yeah. The conversation about your process is so interesting to me in terms of your collecting of image that you're working from, and how you use the computer and modern technology to help to build and inform. And I think that's a really great combination, and you're still coming up with something that to me looks like classical painting, but I like to see the potential of that. And then my other favorite conversation that you had early on was how much you learn from your students, because I feel the exact same way. I get so much inspiration from that process, and it's really a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it really is.
Awesome part of that conversation. Thanks.